Hey friends, my name is Jake. Welcome to Canadian Cutting Edge. We're having a look at a WARSPEAR knife. This is a fairly new brand. I got mine from White Mountain Knives. This is a lower cost knife. Boy, I forgot off the top of my head how much it costs. It's on the screen. We've got 14C 28N stainless steel and Micarta handle, deep carry clip, and it's a flipper. So if you're interested in a knife like this, stick around. The full review's coming right now. If you remember the unboxing video, the knife comes with screwdrivers, so a T8 and a T6. These are very cheap and they're fairly low quality, so it's best not to rely on these, but they do have a use. It comes with an interchangeable pivot collar, so orange instead of green, and some extra hardware, and a black pocket clip, a coated clip, so you can swap out the clip if you want to. Now let's take a look at the knife. Alright, so here is the knife that we're looking at. Let's do a size comparison with the Ontario Rat 1. There we go. It is a smaller knife. If I line up the ends here, you can see it's a little bit smaller in total length. But cutting edge is very much the same. It's a full-size folder. My hands are just into the extra large range, and you can see it sticks out just a little bit. We've got a flat micarta, so it's not rounded at all. It is chamfered around the edges everywhere. We've got a G10 backspacer with a lanyard pin. So I quite like the lanyard pin right there. That's a good way for a lanyard to be tied off. Keeps it narrow and keeps it from getting in the way of the back of the hand right there. We've got a nice belly here. Very comfortable shape in hand to use this knife. We've got a liner lock. The lock release is chamfered. There's only a liner on this side. There's no liner at all on this side. There's just a washer before the steel ball bearings. Micarta is very strong, so it's strong enough only having a steel liner on one side, and it's a cost cutting measure, and it's a weight cutting measure. This knife is not very heavy. Lockup is exactly where I like a brand new knife to be, and disengaging the lock is not hard at all. It's no problem getting that to move over. Left-handed as well. It's not hard to use this knife. The flipper, as you saw, has got a sort of a rounded profile right there, and it's got jimping on the front, so it works really well for light switch method, and just pushing down on a bit of an angle. Just deploys very well. The steel ball bearings run quite smoothly, no blade play, side to side, up and down. We've got a bolt for the pivot pin that's got this hex-shaped head, so it's not free spinning, and it has the added benefit of being fully tubular down the middle instead of having a D-shaped milled out section. So it's got pretty smooth action. On the other side here, though, we've got a G10 pivot collar sort of thing that sits in there, and then a big button screw. That's ugly. I'll just say it plain and simple the way it is. I think that's ugly. I really wish they would have had some other system over here. Maybe something steel that fit in there instead of this G10. You can see the spaces around there. It just doesn't fit in there quite right. It's kinked over just a little bit on an angle. And then a button screw that's recessed. It's ugly. Just like button screws over here. This button screw is just a little bit proud. That button screw is sitting quite deep. And then on the other side here, that button screw is really deep. And this one is, fairly deep. So button screws, I hate it on G10. I hate it on Micarta. Button screws, it's a cheap way to make knives. But I've already taken this knife apart and recorded that part of the video. So yeah, the screws are pretty good quality. They didn't strip out. They are free spinning in there, so I did have to use 2 screwdrivers, one on either side, to engage those, to put it back together. To take it apart was fine, but to get this screw back in, it was just freely spinning along, so I had to have a driver on either side. Finishing off about this handle section is the pocket clip. That is an ugly pocket clip. It's deep carry, at least. Functionally, it works okay, but it looks ugly. The tip comes up a little bit. It does flatten out a tiny bit on the tip there, so it's not hot in the hand, but it certainly doesn't look good. Let's demonstrate it going into a pocket. It climbs over that edge, no problem, every single time I want it to. Sometimes it gets caught a little bit on those screws, but not usually. And so there you go. You've got about 1/4 of an inch sticking out, about 7 millimeters of the knife handle sticking out of the pocket. It also comes in a tan micarta. So you got the WP502G, which is what this one is, and then the WP502T, which is the tan micarta. How about the blade? I like this blade shape. It's solid. It's functional. I'm calling it a clip point. You get that clip point right there. We've got a flat section up here, and right there it says 14C28N. But on this side, you've got big, dark black WARSPEAR, which I dislike. Just plain and simple, I dislike. The sharpening on this, it was less sharp than average from what I've been measuring. I measure the sharpness of knives. Been doing that for quite a while. And then the grind angles. This side was done poorly, and this side was done very, very poorly. It didn't cut all that well. So I decided, I don't usually do this, I decided to sharpen the knife and try again. Now you can see, there you go, when I hold the knife here, you see that little glint right there? There's that tiny bit of edge that I didn't sharpen yet, because right here it was sharpened at over 30 degrees, and so I already had to remove a fair bit of steel off the side of the bevel there to get it to sharpen. So that tiny last little bit wasn't sharpened, but the rest of it I sharpened, and on this side it sharpened all the way along. And yeah, it cuts quite well. It's a good knife for cutting. We do have a distal taper on this knife. It starts right there. So the knife starts getting thinner at that point, and it just keeps going thinner all the way to the tip. So this tip is a terrible tip to use for prying, or even for whacking into some hardwood and twisting over. You're asking for this tip to break. It's a thin, light tip. The steel is pretty light, the handle's pretty light, the whole knife is fairly light, under 3.5 ounces, although it's a full-size knife. So just know, if you're getting this knife, this is not the kind of knife you're going to use to pry with. And to slice with, though, it works quite well. And being thinner all the way up, the whole thing being thinner for over half of the knife, helps it go through things quite well. The next thing of note is we've got a hole here. It's sort of triangle shaped. It's been chamfered around the edges. It's not sharp to the touch anywhere. It's not good to get in, and there you go. I got to flick the knife open that time, but it's kind of hard to get your finger in there to flick it open. If they would have made the shape, a little bit longer before it came back, if they would have, let's use this knife to point with, looking at the tip of this blade, if this hole would have come over further and then back, so it would be a longer hole, then you'd be able to use it to flick open it from the bottom. One more thing to talk about is this big sharpness choil. This is a huge sharpness choil, but it's a very small forward choil, so it's really not, good to put your finger up here. You're asking for yourself to get cuts along the side of your finger if you try to use it in a forward choil manner. So they could have made it smaller and, just had a regular sharpness choil. Just know that that's not a forward choil. There's one more change I made with this knife. And I made the change after I recorded, well, when I recorded the internals. The detent was a little bit soft on this knife. And I want it to be a little harder. And now, you know, this knife just flies out with authority. So what I did when I had it apart is I took this lock arm and I flexed it over a little bit harder so it's pushing a little bit harder onto the tang of the blade. And now the detent is simply awesome. It's very easy to wreck a knife doing that kind of change. So I don't recommend you practice or try doing that kind of change on the detent unless you're willing to break your knife, because over here it can get fatigued and then just simply break, and then you don't have any lock on your knife. So now let's show you the little bit of the video of it taken apart. Here it is taken apart. You can see the path here for the captured stop pin. There it is right there. Works quite well. Decent wear on there. Ceramic detent ball. Steel ball bearings. We do have button screws that I mentioned before that I really dislike, but they came out fairly well. There's no risk of them stripping out, at least not when I took them apart. So they're the best possible button screws you can have. And let me see if I can get this out. There we go. There's the pivot collar in G10. And they give you spares, so you can swap it out if you want to. I really wish it was just a steel pivot collar. Then it would reflect this side much better. And then if it had a flat screw instead of a button screw, then it would be much more consistent. I can see why they wanted to add a little, bling to their knife, because it's fairly boring. But I think this was a mistake. So that's most of the knife. Let's go over all the sizes, dimensions, and that kind of information. Like I said, 14C28N, that has a Rockwell hardness of around 5960, which is quite good. It's a very good budget steel. The factory sharpness was 185. The average that I've been getting on most knives, over 250 knives I've tested, is around 140, 150. So 185 is less sharp. The weight of this knife, 97 grams, 3.45 ounces. The cutting edge length of this knife, 85 millimeters, 3.35 inches. So basically 3 1/3 inches. The blade length, tip to the closest spot on the micarta, 87.2 millimeters, 3.43 inches. The blade thickness is 3.08 millimeters, 0.121 of an inch, so just under 1/8 of an inch. The blade depth, its biggest right here at the heel of the blade, 27.4 millimeters, 1.08 inches. The thickness behind the grind, this is another good plus, 0.47 millimeters, 18.5 thousandths of an inch, so nice and thin. The grind angle. The grind angle on this side, it started at 18.3, 18.4, and then the tip inch, 23.4. So it really got steep over here, but this side's even worse. It started at 28.2, 30.6, 30.7. 30 degrees. That's a very sort of blunt edge trying to push through things. So it's now 18 degrees per side, and it slices like a dream. Hopefully you can sharpen your own knives, because this thing sharpens up quite well. The handle now. The handle length is 120.2 millimeters, 4.73 inches. The grip area, it's just a bit under 10 centimeters, a bit less than 4 inches. The thickness of the handle, not counting the pocket clip, is 12.2 millimeters. That's 0.48 of an inch. The handle depth, the biggest area is right here at this bulge, 28.7 millimeters, 1.13 inches. When the knife is closed, the widest depth point is at the same spot, 33.9 millimeters, 1.33 inches. And the total length of this knife is 207.8 millimeters, which is pretty near 8 3/8. So that's the dimensions and things. What are my thoughts? This is a good budget knife if you want a user. I really like it. It comes in comfortable. Once you've sharpened it, it cuts well. The pivot works nicely. It's got good action, especially now that I fixed the pressure on the detent a little bit. Flipper's comfortable. I really like the lanyard option. I don't use lanyards mostly, but if I do, this is the best way to get them. The pocket clip, it's functional, although it's a little bit ugly. The button screws, those are ugly. The pivot pin here, that's ugly. The distal taper, that can be a pro, that can be a con. It really depends on how you look at it. Just be aware that it thins out a lot towards the tip. The pocket clip is right hand only, I should have mentioned that. So you don't have a left hand option for the pocket clip. And that silly forward choil thing, I just wish this was smaller or larger, and then it would be much more useful. But it's a decent knife. I don't know, I will check, and I'll put it on the screen, if any WARSPEAR knives have been tested by Love Them Knives and his friends. Lee over there has had a lot of knives tested to make sure that the steel that they claim to use is what they claim to use. So read the text on the screen. And as far as my cutting experience and how it felt under the stone to sharpen it, I think it probably is 14C28N by Sandvik, so that's a good thing. I've got one more knife by WARSPEAR, and maybe it'll get reviewed this month. Maybe it won't. I posted some pictures on WhatsApp, on Instagram a while back, but I think I'll review a few other knives before I review this second WARSPEAR knife. They've also got a third WARSPEAR knife, which looks a lot like the Y-Start JIN02 knife that I've reviewed years ago. It's got the exact same format with some subtle changes, but it's got to be the same basic design with just a little bit of updates on it. So WARSPEAR, a new brand. They certainly could be doing worse, but hopefully they get to doing even better than they're doing now. So it's a reasonable knife. Thanks, my friends, for watching. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys are the best. Thanks for liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. And remember, friends, cut towards your chum, not your thumb. Bye for now.